Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of three amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. If you are not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman over on the Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you absolutely should be. You should obviously be reading Omari Sankofa II's work over on the Detroit Free Press. And you can subscribe and read/watch everything I have putting out over on the Motor City Hoops Substack. I've actually started my second round draft prospect video breakdown, so you can find Maxime Renault, Adu Thiero, Ryan Cockbrenner, and Chaz Lanier will probably be sometime on Wednesday, with multiple guys coming after that. Those are some names that maybe we'll talk about at the end of the podcast when we do some second round NBA draft talk. But today we will talk offseason in general, just strategies, players, free agents, trade targets, etc. But first, right before we start recording, Tom Thibodeau is fired by the New York Knicks. Your instant thoughts on a general NBA topic here on the Pistons Pulse?
Yeah, it's curious because right after the Knicks lost, in the back of my mind, I'm like, this feels like the one that would be shocking. But then when you think about it, it makes a little bit more sense. Still surprising. I mean, he's by far the best coach they've had, since who knows when. And, I think I sympathize with just the fact that Cat trade happened right before training camp, so you didn't really have an extended period of time to figure out how to get it to work with him and Brunson on both ends of the floor. But I think what kind of doomed Tibbs is that it didn't really work on either end of the floor. They didn't do a lot of pick and rolls with Cat. Cat didn't take a lot of threes. It just seems like they didn't really know how to utilize him and never really figured it out. And I don't think on paper Indiana's that much better than the Knicks, just from a pure roster standpoint. I think part of that is just that the Pacers were optimized and the Knicks weren't. Again, some of that's just the Pacers have had time to figure things out and the Knicks hadn't. But I think especially with the sake of the apron now, teams just feel that urgency. And I'd be curious, just knowing what you think of that as well, Bryce. It just seemed like throughout the playoffs, they never really figured out how to get it working with Brunson and Cat, and that had been an issue since the regular season as well. And we saw that with the Pistons too, obviously, with all the games they played against them.
So, unfortunately, Sam and I recorded our New York Knicks offseason preview the other day. It has not dropped yet, which I guess that is a fortunate thing because now we will re-record that offseason preview. Speaking of, guys, I think the Pistons offseason preview we did over on the Game Theory podcast is the most viewed one. So the Pistons fan base definitely showing out. If you have not watched that, it's 40 minutes of Pistons only, Pistons specific content looking at the offseason. That's on the Game Theory podcast under the videos tab. But what I said, was, as somebody who really believes in the process, I don't love a lot of what Thibodeau's process was, especially in the playoffs. I didn't agree with a lot of it, but at the same time, he did just lead this team to the Eastern Conference Finals. And I had a hard time saying fire the guy that just head coached them to the Eastern Conference Finals and really a better finish the last couple of years. And you brought up an important point as well in terms of incorporating Cat that late in the offseason, or I guess early in the season, however you want to look at it. So my stance was you bring Tibbs back on a pretty short leash.
Yeah, and that's what I think the question was, is do you just give him an offseason to, see if things could gel a little bit better, and then if not, do you make a decision from there? But then it's okay, now we have another half season or another full season of Cat and Brunson and haven't made the strides forward we want. And now, I also wonder if Jason Tatum's injury at all played into it, right? The East is even more open now next season than it was previously. And again, on paper, I feel like this Knicks team is probably an Eastern Conference Finals team, theoretically anyway, if you look at best case scenario. But I think just long term, this was not a Tibbs roster, right? This is a roster that's going to be defined by how far Brunson and Cat can take it, and much of that's going to be on offense. And we probably have a big enough body of work on Tibbs to know that his strength is on the defensive side. So could he have solved that over the course of an offseason? Like, who knows? Like, you could do the half measure. You have to lay off all your assistants to get new staff in and this and that. But, it seems like for the Knicks ownership, it was a pretty decisive decision.
Wes says that was nuts. I don't get it. I just don't think their roster is as good as they think it is. Pieces don't mesh. That's not on the coach. So Muhammad has hello from Italy. So we got Italy in the house right now. Sham says hello from California. So we're all over the place. And then Chris says, if you're not subscribed to Motor City Hoops Substack, you absolutely should be. Thank you, Chris. I really, really appreciate that. So it'll be interesting now to see what the Knicks do. I was thinking James Edwards will now have his fourth coach in 4 years. Is that right? So he went Dwayne. No, it'd just be 3 and Dwayne, Monty, Thibs this year, and then whoever their coach is next year. So James Edwards III, always having to create those new relationships with the head coach.
Yeah, 4 straight off seasons is steep, and like he just got off the playoff grind too, and now there's this. So good luck, James. I hope you get to take some time off soon.
He has a head coaching search or decision or whatever that he's got to be covering for the next couple of months. Not to mention all of the conversations around whether Karl-Anthony Towns should be traded and all of that. Okay, nobody came here to listen to us talk about the Knicks. So we were going to look at the Pistons offseason, and we're going to start with just kind of a general approach to the offseason, Omari. We will talk specific names in segment 2, but just in general, let's talk about what we want the Pistons to do or what we would do, and then what we think the Pistons will do. So let's start with what you would want the Pistons to do, right? Like, what would you do if you were advising Trajan Langdon or whatever? Again, you don't have to give specific names, but kind of what is your stance? What is your vision for the offseason for the Pistons in terms of big move, run it back, somewhere in between, big picture without mentioning specific names just yet?
Well, I would say the safe move is probably just running it back, right? And, as long as Malik Beasley's willing to accept that 14.1 million MLE, you have a pretty straightforward path of just bringing him, THJ, and Schroeder back. What I think we had Keith Smith on the other week, and he said if you just swap THJ and Schroeder's salaries from last season, sorry, THJ and Beasley's salaries from last season, and you're probably pretty happy, and that's essentially what it would be. I think the other side of that is this could be a very chaotic summer movement-wise, and we're talking about some of this, but with all the teams looking to duck the second apron, either they're already there or they could be there, in a year. There's going to be options in free agency and also in the trade market, and I guess the overarching question is there a theoretical upgrade that we could get that would make it worthwhile, not having the continuity of just bringing those guys back? Me personally, like if I'm Trajan, like this is just my opinion, like I probably lean toward running it back, but I say that without knowing the full picture of what will be available, once we get closer to free agency. And there is a chance that depending on which guys become available, you may have to double think and say, okay, like let's make sure we're exercising the best of our options here.
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting is we don't, you brought up the landscape, and we can always think we know the landscape and think we know what a player's worth, and what a player's worth is what a team is willing to pay him, and you never know how that changes, right? I mean, and maybe a player is number 2 on a team's board and they're going to give him the non-tax MLE, but they signed the number 1 player on their board for the non-tax MLE, and then nobody else values him at the same spot, and then now he ends up on a vet min somewhere. Like, I wouldn't have guessed, I'm not saying this is what happened to him, I wouldn't have guessed Tyus Jones was going to end up on a vet min last year playing for the Phoenix Suns. Like every year I feel like there are names that end up on vet mins, and so maybe there are plays out, like if Detroit goes the under the cap route, right? We outlined this, the over the cap versus under the cap. Maybe there's a name out there that ends up as a room exception number that I don't foresee, right? Like maybe that is all Nickeil Alexander-Walker is worth. I think he's closer to a non-tax MLE guy. Maybe I'm completely wrong on what his market is going to be, and that's why it is so fascinating. Let's talk about things we think we both agree on. We are both in the camp in general, depending on the value, of not making a huge move. And when I say a huge move, I mean a move that would require trading significant pieces of the young core and or future draft capital. Would you agree that we're both in that space in terms of what we would want to do or want to see happen?
Yeah, I feel like we've been pretty consistent on that.
Hold on. Wes just says, Bryce, you just dropped some awesome economic knowledge, my friend. Something is only as valuable as someone is willing to pay. Oh, all right.
That's teacher.
Let's go.
That's the teacher side of Bryce coming out. He must have been the economics teacher this past year.
I was the science teacher, and I just had to take a praxis because actually my teaching license was in physical education. So I had to take the science praxis to get licensed in science. And so I've been studying on that. But
let's
cool.
revisit that later on this offseason. That's okay. That's like the
okay. You know what I think you're gonna hate what I tell you I used to study for it. What do you think I used to study for it?
ChatGPT.
I did, and it worked. Omari, I'm sorry. I know people don't like Chat.
No, I don't hate ChatGPT in every capacity. There's specific ones that I don't. That's a whole nother discussion. But
yeah,
anything that helps you further yourself in life, I'm all for it, Bryce. Even if it's AI, I'm all for it.
It actually really was beneficial, straight up. But yeah, you're right. That's like after summer league off-season conversation. So you agree? I mean, I think the name that would interest me. Nope, we're not talking names yet. We'll come back to that. Wes will get mad at me if I get out of the outline. Okay, where are we at? What do we think is going to happen? Or no, what would we do in terms of over or under the cap? Where do we each land on that?
Right. I mean, if you're bringing everybody back, then like over the cap's just the way to go. Like just to kind of recap, we talked about last week. Obviously, we have bird rights on Schroeder and THJ, and you essentially do that to eat your cap space up, and then you have the 14.1 mil for Beasley, but you also have the biannual exception that you could go and just get whoever, right? Or maybe you use that to re-sign a couple of guys like Lindy Waters and Paul Reed or whoever. But long story short, like that's the most straightforward path for them is operating over the cap.
Okay, so I think we both land on what we would do is essentially run this back in some capacity. I think we would agree that if there was a small upgrade, like if you could work Nickeil Alexander-Walker, upgrade over Tim Hardaway Jr. I see we have a Jake LaRavia idea here. We'll get into those specific names. But so we both would land on that. We're essentially running this back. I think Keith Black-Trudeau kind of talked me into this a little bit in terms of whenever I brought up the fear of truly running it back and the continuity almost being a negative because does it get stale? Reminding me that we have not seen this team truly play together with Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, Tobias Harris, etc. And so I would be willing to see that. So I think we both land in the same spot in terms of what we would do. What do we think? Yeah. Oh, go ahead, O2.
No, I was just going to say that it kind of echoes something Trajan Lagan said at the trade deadline, which I think could still apply this summer. It's just this group has earned the right to compete. We added Schroeder because they earned the right to compete. You went 44 games to make the leap you just had, and you assume that your young guys are going to continue to get better, then that's kind of the same thinking, right? Has this team just earned the right to run it back? And then, of course, and we'll talk about this later, but you get vets on, deals that are probably more movable than you have now, and that gives you more flexibility going forward. There's a lot, I think, that you solve by just running it back. But again, the Pandora's box of, cap space and free agency may also be worthwhile depending on who's there, right?
Okay, and so guys, we see your names in the comments. Keep throwing them in there. We are starring them. We will talk about them after the break. Okay, so this plays right into what the next part is. Yeah. What do we think Trajan does, O2? You kind of just outlined it, so I think we are going to fall in the same general place in what we think Trajan does, which I'm not saying it's in line with us because we're super smart or something like that. It just seems like he is going to fall in line also with let's run this back. And like you said, they've earned the right to figure out. In some ways, I'm interested. Like, I want to see if Malik Beasley can do again what we just saw, right? So Keith Black-Trudeau, I'm fine with major changes if the deal is right. I just don't think major changes are necessary to anticipate this team being better next season. Trajan should not be under pressure to make a splash. Yeah, so to fairly incorrectly verbalize Keith Black-Trudeau's thoughts, I'm glad he put that in there because I didn't want it to sound, maybe I misconstrued where he stood. So, O2, we think Trajan is going to kind of be in this same realm, right?
To an extent, yeah. Like it's tough to say for certain because again, like there are guys who could become available on the market that will have to at least make you step back and say, we'll be have to at least talk about this, right? Or in the event that maybe THJ and or Beasley want to go elsewhere, then maybe you reconsider the entire approach, right? So I still think that there are some variables you can't account for that could plans of back, up to an extent. But like, I think that's the overall approach that they're thinking with this offseason. They're like, we're not going to make any dramatic changes because we have found something that works, and you need to learn to an extent how much it works. And even after this good season, you probably still can't say that yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about earlier, not knowing what the market is, what if somebody talks themselves into a bigger number for Malik Beasley? Now, the hard part for other teams with that is very few teams can offer more than what Detroit can offer Malik Beasley, right? So that is an advantage for Detroit, where essentially what other teams are going to be able to give is the non-tax MLE. But if Beasley could use that leverage of, hey, such and such team is offering me the non-tax MLE, I'm going to take that unless you offer me more. And if in that situation, Trajan in the front office say, hey, we can't let him walk, well, now they're forced to go under the cap O2, right? Like now their hand has been forced if they want to keep Beasley. And so like that's where things get really interesting with the off. Like I'm fascinated to see what Dennis Schroeder, like I know there's a question in here as we've done our offseason previews over on Game Theory. There's some teams where it's like, Schroeder makes sense here. Schroeder makes sense there. And so I could see him having a market. And so that's where the market for these guys, whether it's bigger or smaller or whatever, could make a real impact as well. I want to ask this before we move on to some specific names, because I do think that would be fun to talk real names and how each of you and I feel about those players and how they would fit, on the team. Of the three big free agents, with all due respect to Paul Reed and Lindy Waters, which one do you think is most likely to be on the team next year? And which one do you think is most unlikely to be on the team next year between Beasley, THJ, and Schroeder?
That's tough. Yeah, like I think it like again, I think it just really comes down to the markets. And I don't want to make a prediction and then it's like, oh well, like this was a prediction and then this happened and whatnot. I think a lot of it just comes down to, if B to take the ML, because there's something like half the league that's got access to like that $14.1 million MLE, right? And some teams are gonna have to make tough decisions as far as retaining some of their own guys or uh like what? Only Brooklyn is the only team I think that has cap space.
Yeah, I think right now they're the only team that like you can really say has cap space, it seems like. I mean, it honestly seems like Detroit is the next most likely team in regards. I'm sure there's some other teams that some mechanisms here and there can get them there, but Brooklyn is the main team that's talked about.
Yeah, I would say I think in the event of like looking at THJ and Schroeder specifically, if both of those guys want to come back, the Pistons very likely could offer them probably a little bit more money than they could get on the market, unless there's a team out there that just really wants Schroeder or like just really wants THJ. Like they have enough money to split between those two guys that I think they could both walk away happy. To me, I think the edge factor is one if they want to come back, and then two Beasley if he could take that 14.1 million MLE. So I think there's a chance either all of them are back or we may only see like one of them back. Like that's how I feel. Like I think it's probably gonna be either one extreme or the opposite, just because of the way the bird rights are set up with two of those guys.
Okay, I will say I think that THJ is the most likely player not to be on the roster, depending on how Trajan views the ball handling situation, right? Especially with Jaden Ivey. Obviously, he felt like the team needed more ball handling at the deadline or he wouldn't have traded for Dennis Schroeder, right? Mm-hmm. So if he sees more of Jaden Ivey and they see more of Jaden Ivey as a completely off-the-ball player that's not going to take some of that on-ball usage, and they don't see Asar taking more on-ball usage, then I think that's more likely Schroeder comes back. If they do see more from Asar and J.I. taking the second unit and stuff like that, it may be him. I just feel like Beasley's probably the most likely one back on the roster. And I think that's just because of how important he was to the team last season is why I land there. So, all right, Let's go to break. When we come back, we'll get into real actual names. And I think this will be fun because we can talk about how we thought they would fit on the team and how they could acquire them and all of that stuff. So we'll start with Naz Reid, Miles Turner, Karis LeVert, some names like that right after this.
All right, we're back with segment 2, and we're going to get into some specific names that have popped up in the rumor mill and the paths the Pistons have to acquire some of these guys, because some of them are free agents. Some of them technically are still under contract. So we can start up with Naz Reid, who has a player option in the neighborhood of, I believe, $15 billion, right? So, for him, do I take the MLE somewhere else and get like long-term money, or do I take the player option and then I have an open market next summer? But his name comes up so much. Where are you as far as Naz Reid as a player first, Bryce? I feel like we have not really discussed him as a player, even though he's obviously somebody that holds a lot of appeal around the league.
Yeah, Naz is really interesting because I'm fascinated to see what Minnesota does. They actually have a few different interesting free agent decisions depending on what players decide. I think Julius has a player option as well. Na is an unrestricted free agent. And, it's a team that, if you're going to keep Julius and pay him, do you also keep Naz? Do you like those? Is there somebody else on the roster you think that can replace it? Do they let Julius walk and think Naz can, step into that role? And I think that's what's most interesting with Naz Reid. I think he's really, really good, especially offensively. I think what he brings you offensively is fascinating. Wes and I have talked about him a lot the last couple of days in terms of like, is he a 4 that moonlights as the 5? Is he a 5 that moonlights at the 4? Like Wes threw out a scenario to me that I was like, I pushed back a little bit on. I wasn't sure. Like, how many minutes do you want him playing at the 5? And those type of things. Like, because I just look at him as a big, like a guy that has that versatility to play either position. And I think in that way, he's very exciting because just having that versatility would be really cool. But it's like, what is that worth, O2? How much do you pay that? And and Keith Black Trudeau brings up Naz, I think, is a strong sign and trade candidate. It's so hard to tell because with new ownership, you don't know how they stand on payroll. So that's why Minnesota is fascinating. I said these exact same things over on our offseason preview that hasn't dropped yet. I think Naz, along with Jonathan Kuminga, are the most likely sign and trade candidates across the league right now, at least the ones I've come across so far. And so I think that would be the way. And then it's like, what do you give up, Omari? What are you willing to give up to bring Naz Reid to Detroit? Because I don't think you're signing him with straight cap space. Like, I think he's probably going to get more than that unless you move Fontecchio or something like that, and then maybe you're getting close.
Yeah, and then, it raises the question of what would it take to, salary dump Fontecchio to, create the room to get a guy like Naz Reid. Because the Pistons are around $17 billion in cap space that they could create. So Naz Reid could opt in, and then you do, like, let's say you send Fontecchio back. Yeah, it's like, what else would make that worthwhile from Minnesota's end? But I'm also curious if the money is there for to go really higher than his 15 billion player option. I believe more teams are going to have a cap space next summer than this summer. There could be incentive for him to run it back. We'll see. I think Jake Fisher had a report recently that he's going to try to get more money on the market, but it's a very MLE friendly market. Like, it just seems like most teams are probably going to be capped at that 14.1 figure unless they make other moves to clear salary. So we'll see. I like Naz Reid as a player. I think he would fit great in Detroit, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's back in Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've worked on the impression that he is back in Minnesota, right? And again, this is going to come up with the next name we bring up as well. If you were going to sign Naz as a free agent and go under the cap, you're essentially going to end up using all of that cap space, Omari. So it's not just getting off of Fontecchio. Let's say getting off of Fontecchio gets you to the number to sign Naz Reid, right? Well, now you have also now have just the room exception to bring back one of Schroeder, Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., along with moving off a rotation piece in the regular season in Simone Fontecchio. So you're really going to cut into your rotation in a true free agent under the cap signing situation, which is why I think there's more likely that it would be some sort of sign and trade. And then, like how do you match? Who do you goes back? The money, all of that. You get into base year compensation, like all of those different things. So let's move on to the next name because I think this one is another really interesting one. So Mohammed from Italy, appreciate you. Does the interest in Miles Turner, my ideal 5 to match with Cade, signify that the front office doesn't see Duren as the long-term answer? Is he on the trade block? Hard to believe one of them goes to the bench. Thoughts on Miles Turner and what that may mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Miles Turner interest is just interest. It doesn't mean that they're hardcore committed to acquiring him at any cost. Whereas, do I think it reflects any, tough opinions of the current players on the roster? I think Miles Turner is a good player. You say he's the ideal 5 to match with Cade. I think Miles Turner is the ideal 5 to match with just about anybody. Like he's kind of in that Brick Lopez group of, he's just the perfect modern 5 because of his outside shot and just all around ability to score. So, I mean, I wouldn't take it too seriously. Like, teams are always going to be interested in good guys, and if there's a deal that makes sense, then obviously I'm sure they would go that route. But I wouldn't take that to mean anything hard and fast about where Duren stands on the roster or anything. Right? It's just a report, so something actually goes down.
The more I'm around this space, Omari, the more I've learned that a lot of these stuff doesn't come from the teams, that it comes from agents and agencies and stuff like that are trying to drum up interest or use leverage. Like, who does this benefit the most? I've learned this from the front office show with Keith Smith and Trevor Lane. When a report like this comes out, who does this information benefit the most? And in this one, to me, it benefits Miles Turner the most, right? You're trying to drum up potential interest and competition for his services to maybe leverage some more money from the Indiana Pacers. They're in the NBA Finals. I don't know if they're going to win it or not. I picked the Thunder in 5, so obviously I don't think they are, but that team is a lot of fun, and I think he's a huge part of what that makes that team successful. Not as much as Tyrese Halliburton, not as much as Pascal Siakam, but the other thing is, Pascal Siakam said when he got traded to Indiana that Miles Turner was one of the bigs he wanted to play with. Like, that was a player in the NBA he had pinpointed to want to play with. And it makes sense because of his floor spacing ability. I think he was good in the playoffs until the Knicks series. I wonder if he's playing through an injury right now. He just doesn't look like he's moving as well as what he normally does. I just don't see how Indiana lets him walk, especially when their backup center situation is a mess as well. Isaiah Jackson coming off a torn Achilles. Obviously, Wiseman was going to be a backup for them before he tore his Achilles. And I think Thomas Bryant is an unrestricted free agent also. Like, they had to play Tony Bradley. With all due respect to Tony Bradley, they had to play him in the Knicks series. So I just don't see how Indiana lets him walk and then comes back next year with a better center situation. So I don't think Miles is a realistic target at this point with how the season has gone for Indiana.
I agree with that. Yeah. It's like, I'm sure a lot of teams have interest in Miles Turner because he's good, but that interest is completely harmless if the team has no intention on trading him, right? And I think the cost for the Pistons to even make Indiana sniff at a Miles Turner trade because, again, like, no one else can do what Miles Turner does, including most of the players on the Pistons, except, Beefs who haven't shown it in the playoffs yet. But, I think he has that type of upside. But long story short, like, I think we're on the same page. Like, he's more than likely not going to go anywhere. So, the Pistons could be as interested as they want, but realistically, there's probably not an offer that they could make to get him.
Mr. Ray says, I mean, interest in stretch 5s isn't a direct indictment of Duren, but it does signify that they are perhaps looking in other direction to maximize this young core. Yeah, I've said I would rather see them do a proof of concept stretch big, one that they could sign to. Okay, so Sham brings up, can we get Lopez just because he is such a Pistons killer? Stu can move to the 4. My thing with Lopez, or even Al Horford is another name I brought up, is it's just like short-term deals that show proof of concept. The issue here is I don't love the Isaiah Stewart at the 4 as much, Omari, but like, is Lopez signing up to be in a rotation of 3 centers? Is Al Horford signing up to be in the rotation of 3 centers? He can play a little bit more 4 maybe, but like, that's kind of the issue. That's why I think a name we'll talk about in like 15 or 20 minutes is the place I would go for the stretch big proof of concept more than these free agents. Let's get into some other, maybe, I feel like those are the biggest names. Well, let's go to this one because I see it in the chat quite a bit. Jaren Jackson Jr. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. would be awesome. My thing with Jaren Jackson Jr. is I think Jaren could actually come in and also be the second offensive option that we always talk about as well. Like Jaren, I don't know if people realize how good Jaren has been. The last 2 years ago, it was in the absence of a lot of players. It wasn't as efficient. This year, I'm pretty sure he ended up as the leading scorer on the Grizzlies with pretty good efficiency. I'm pulling up his numbers right now. So in the regular season, Ja ended up a point higher, but 22 points on 49, 38, 78 from Jaren Jackson Jr. The numbers in the playoffs, 4 games, not as good, but I do think there is a world where he could be the second option. I don't know what Memphis is going to do this offseason. My guess is they go ahead and up his salary this year and extend him off of that, and he stays in Memphis long term, though.
Yeah, like again, like Jaren is in that Miles Turner category of it's just really hard to find players with that skill set, and those players could just be really transformational for your team. Like I love Ja's game. Like the way Jaren can impact both sides, I think makes him their best all-around player. You're talking about a guy who just won Defensive Player of the Year. A guy who's still really young. I think he's in year 6 or 7, but like he was one of the youngest players in his class. He can't be older than 25 or 26 now. I mean, if I'm Memphis, I'm not letting him go. If I'm the Pistons and you have an avenue to get him, then I think that's certainly worth discussing. Especially if you could keep Duran somehow in like that type of deal as well. Because Jaren just he doesn't rebound. He's averaging like 5-6 rebounds a game. So you're not.
We can keep it straight. You watched it. You watched it firsthand.
That's just like he's not even looking at the glass a lot of times. So you have to pair him with a 5, and that's why the Grizzlies. I've had Steven Adams and
Zach Edey
and all these centers over the years. Jonas Valanciunas. Guys who can just clean up rebounds. So. With that caveat, big fan of Jaren Jackson's game, and for that reason, like I would think Memphis doesn't try to let him go, but we will see.
Ben says maybe a trade deadline candidate if things go off the rails in Memphis next season. Mm-hmm. Maybe. But again, my opinion is they're about to invest very heavily in Jaren Jackson Jr. Again, I think they've put themselves in position to have cap space, but to have cap space to give him a raise on his current deal that then they can extend off of that. And this is something you guys have thrown back at me, and rightfully so. That's where you find yourself when you have descending contracts. I've brought up descending contracts before. The issue with descending contracts is whenever it comes time to extend off of them, if the player way outplays that contract, it can become difficult, which is why Memphis traded Marcus Smart, created flexibility so that they can do this. Mark Murray says, what's up, guys? What's up, Mark? How are you doing? Appreciate you tuning in from Kansas. I don't even know if he's a Pistons fan, but he's locked in on the Pistons Pulse, which I appreciate. We went to college together, so always appreciate Mark for jumping in there. So, all right, let's go to a few other names, maybe not as big. So I'll throw out some names, and you just give me the name of the bunch that interests you the most. KO2, Karis LeVert, Luke Kennard, Dorian Finney-Smith, Steven Adams, Chris Boucher. We'll just go, what is that? That was 5 at a time. Yeah. I know it's a random 5 names, but you give me the one that's most interesting to you.
I would say that I like the idea of Dorian Finney-Smith.
Sure.
Just I think defensively, he fits this team like a glove. He gives you some depth at the 4 need. Shot the 3, I think, pretty well too, and I'm going to look up his numbers really quick. But out of all those guys, I think his name stands out the most for sure.
My bad, Ben. Ben, you had asked the question about Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. So I apologize, Ben. I didn't click on that from the chat. So that's my bad. I'm gonna blame Wes for not putting it up there. So, but yeah, I think Dorian Finney-Smith is probably the name as well. I mean, I like the idea. I know for most Pistons fans, like Luke, I don't know how they feel about him or whatever. He's still a guy that can space the floor, can do a little bit with the ball in his hands. But I just think in general of these guys, I think DFS is the one that makes the most sense. So did you have the numbers for him?
Yeah. So last season, 9 points, 4 rebounds, 45% overall, 41% from three, and that was one of the best marks of his career. But like he's a career 36% shooter. I mean, he's sustained good shooting. Probably over his last 4 seasons, he's 38% from three. 6'7", like that's perfect. Like that's exactly what the Pistons need.
All right. So other free agent names. One of these also came. Well, a couple of them came from the chat. Matisse Thybulle, Jayshawn Tate, Nikhil Alexander Walker, Jonathan Kaminga, Jake LaRavia. So let me YouTube user, and I did see this YouTube user in the Motor City Hoops Substack. I was going to get back to you. It's been a little bit of a busy day, but says I'd like to propose a sign and trade for Jake LaRavia, Fontecchio, and a second for LaRavia, paying him $8+ million, which is significantly more than the Kings can offer. Real quick background on LaRavia and what he's talking about here. Memphis declined his rookie 5th-year option, so that locked in LaRavia to only being able to sign with his current team for $5 million, or roughly $5 million. When he got traded to Sacramento, that went with him. So that upholds with Sacramento and actually with Memphis as well. Since they're the team that traded him, he can obviously sign for more with other teams. The reason that LaRavia would be inclined to stay with the Kings, maybe even at a lesser number, is because that team would then keep his bird rights, which then would offer up more money, with another contract. But in this scenario, YouTube users throwing out the idea of a sign and trade where he can get his money, but also end up with a different team. And then also YouTube user, if the team wanted to make a more splashy move, you could do a sign and trade for Kaminga without giving up too much in terms of assets, but would lock you into only re-signing your guys in the future. So again, those names: Matisse Thybulle, Jayshawn Tate, Nikhil Alexander Walker, Kaminga, LaRavia, a name that pops out of that group, Omari.
I think Nikhil Alexander Walker, probably is the name that most people are familiar with, and he's probably one of the cleanest fits in that group and one of the most proven fits in that group. Shot around 38% from three last season, 6'6" wing, can really defend. He's another player who's going to be in that like mid-level exception range, from all the teams around the league that could offer that. I also like Jake LaRavia. I liked him since he was a prospect a few years back, and it took him a few years to figure it out. But I just think he's a really solid all-around 6'8" wing, and he hasn't really had a big role yet. But he is the type of guy I would target, with the expectation that he could be a pretty big piece at some point, or at least a pretty key role player, just with all the boxes he checks for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think LaRavia is underrated as a defender. I think he can actually really defend. And so if you want to continue to build out this wing forward room of guys that can really guard, like if that's the identity that Trajan and JB want to go with, I think him or Nam make a ton of sense in regard to that. Like, continue to let Cade carry this insane offensive load, and then surround them with guys that can really defend. Like Keith says, really fun offensive player, but I have concerns about his defense. I would respectfully disagree. Like, I think LaRavia can take real matchups and has real versatility on that end. I think there's limitations. Like, there is some foot speed stuff with that, but I think offensively, to his point, like fun, like he can handle the ball a little bit. He moves, he understands. The shooting and the jumper can be a little inconsistent at times, but I do think he would be a nice addition. I've talked about Nah quite a bit. Let's get your thoughts on Jonathan Kaminga real quick here, Omari, because I think it is important to bring up that name. I think this would most likely be a sign and trade. It wouldn't have to be. Detroit could go under the cap and then offer the most they wanted to Kaminga in that way, but my guess is it would be a sign and trade. He can score the basketball. Like, I talk about a number 2 option. Maybe he could be that. I don't know. Are you in the Jonathan Kaminga potential? Okay, go ahead.
Career 33% shooter for three. Shot 30.5% last year, 32.1% the prior season. Like, we've got, if I'm Trajan, I'm like, we've got Ron Holland, we've got Asar. I'm invested in those guys. I don't know what the cost for Kaminga would be. I think, again, he's a pretty divisive player, and I don't know if I doubt he fetches the full MLE on the open market. Like, I don't know what that would look like from a contract standpoint, but that's just not high on my priority list. Like, I'm not looking at this summer like we need to go get another athletic non-shooting wing. Especially with what Asar and Ron Holland showed last season. If you're like a believer in the jumper, then like that's another thing. But for me, I think that just kind of puts him in the like we're not going to go this route category.
Z Digital says, "What up, Doe? What up?" You know what's funny, O2? I find myself saying that to my students. Like, I'll see them in the morning, be like, "What up, Doe?" And because I try to be the cool, that's not cool old teacher that's like, "What up?" and stuff like that. And I just naturally say, "What up, Doe?" And then they look at me like I'm an idiot because they don't know what it means. So, yeah, Wes agrees with you. I like Kuminga a lot, but Holland, Asar, Kuminga is not really workable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is fair, Keith Blatchford. And with Kuminga, I feel like when he isn't featured, he struggles to stay engaged, not a fan. I think if you were going to bring Kuminga, you would have to give him the number 2 option role. And then it's like, do you think he's actually talented enough and that's going to work, right? Like that. I want to go to Chris real quick, and then we'll go to some other trade names. You'll pick your favorite of the bunch, and then we'll go to draft stuff at the end. What are the options coming out of OKC? They're about to get expensive, still have a lot of draft assets. Who are the young fringe players on the Thunder you'd consider going after? I will tell you the 2 names that I would love the most would be Isaiah Joe or Aaron Wiggins. Like, if they decided they wanted to be out of business with those 2 guys for whatever reasons, which I don't think they will because both of those guys are on really good contracts also, but those are the 2 names that I would be most excited about if it's not obviously like Hartenstein or Caruso or somebody like that, right? Kaysen Wallace is a great name.
Yeah, Kaysen Wallace.
I assume Kaysen is like, I mean, I guess the other name, O2, would be if they're going to replace Lou Dort with Kaysen Wallace, like I would be interested in Lou Dort. I love Lou Dort. So either one of those 2 guys, if they don't think they need both of them for some reason or don't want to pay both of them or something like that.
Yeah, like OKC is like such a weird team because as good as they are and as young as they are, like the good thing about being young is that you're also still cheap. And you still have a lot of guys on those first contracts, and the guys that you have on like not those types of deals are on pretty reasonable deals for the most part. So they don't really need to do anything that drastic this summer. I don't have
yet.
Yeah, not yet. I don't have a full understanding of their cap situation, but I know that they're not sniffing the second apron, and depending on how this offseason shakes out, like is there a deal out there that, because you also have to keep in mind like they have like a gazillion draft picks still. So if I'm them, like I don't know if I do anything. Like honestly, I probably just sit back, say good job guys, assuming you win the finals, have fun, and front office, you did a great job. Let's retain who we can, but I'm not trying to blow this team up at all. Like we could cross that bridge when we get to it.
Quick, Darshan says Jalen Williams, AJ Mitchell. AJ Mitchell is a great name. I will just say this. I don't think this is happening in the next year or so, but in 27-28, assuming these guys are all on the roster, Shea will have a new Supermax or whatever it is. Chet will have to be on his new contract, which could be big if he makes All-NBA. We'll see. J-Dub will be on his non-rookie deal, the first year of it in 27. This is all the first year of those deals. Also that year, Lou Dort is now an unrestricted free agent. Who was the other? Oh, Hartenstein, also an unrestricted free agent. So like some of these things might be coming down the road. I just don't think it's right now. Okay, to finish off here, so I want you to give me the name that would be most interesting to you of these guys in a trade. So Joshua Austin says, what do you guys think about trading for PJ Washington? He also asked about John Collins, and then a few other names I'll throw in there. RJ Barrett, Pat Williams, Rui, Domantas Sabonis, Trey Murphy III. Which one, like just in a vacuum, which one of those names? Let's throw it in there too. Somebody brings up Keon Ellis. Which of those names is like most interesting to you kind of in a vacuum, I guess?
I would say in a vacuum, like Trey Murphy is the one that's
I agree.
Like, absolutely. And that's probably a pretty obvious pick. Beyond that, like I like the idea of PJ Washington, just like another big, burly big. He could shoot the 3. Like you could probably play him and Stu together and be just fine. Like you could play
maybe a Tobias replacement potentially, right?
Maybe a potential Tobias replacement as he gets a bit older and his road, probably goes down. Although with his game, like, I wouldn't be surprised if that takes a few years. But like beyond that, it's just sort of like what's the cost to asset ratio here? Where like Pat Williams, like that's an interesting name. I just feel like he hasn't really carved out much of a role in Chicago. So what are you giving up for a guy like that? And is it worthwhile investing in a guy like Pat Williams who probably overlaps with Asar and Ron Holland in a way? Rui Hachimura, like solid dude. Like what is it going to cost to get a guy like that? Sabonis, no, I like Sabonis as a player. I think what it would cost to trade for him and then figuring out his fit, like that's probably not something the Pistons need to deal with right now. If I'm just picking two guys, I would say Trey Murphy and PJ Washington.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be like similar and give the same names. Trey would obviously be the name. Trey is a player that I would at least consider trading some assets for because I just believe in him that much. He is the one name that this offseason, if New Orleans were truly trying to trade him for whatever reason, which I would absolutely disagree with and not understand why, he would be one I would at least consider doing that with. And then PJ, Sam actually brought this up, like a Dennis Schroeder for PJ Washington sign and trade type of deal, because what is PJ's role in Dallas? They have Anthony Davis, they have two centers, and they're about to draft Cooper Flagg. Where does PJ Washington play in that rotation unless they're playing, dudes way, up and down the lineup? And they could use Dennis Schroeder, right? Like they could use him in the non-Kyrie games next year. We saw it this year. They could play him with Kyrie or in the back unit or whatever. So I like that name as well. All right. I think that gets us through a bunch of the names for the offseason in terms of trades, free agents, all of that. This is going to time up about perfectly. I didn't figure 20 minutes of second round prospect talk would go super great, but we'll have about 15 minutes here. We're going to go to break. When we come back, we are going to talk about Maxime Renaud to start, and then we can talk about whoever you want after that.
All right, we are back with segment 3, aka the Motor City Hoops Substack section of the pod, where we talk about the second round picks. We're going to start off with Maxime. It's right. That's like
Renaud.
We're going to start off with him. I'm not going to lie. I'm still digging into the second round prospect guys. So I'm going to lean on you heavily for this one. But this is the big section, right? Like obviously that's a position that makes sense at 37. What do you like about him?
Real quick, Alan says, where's the Keon Ellis love? I honestly forgot about Keon Ellis. That would definitely be another name. I think Keon Ellis is awesome. If he was actually on the table, then yes, 100%. I think he defends. He can knock down shots. I think Keon Ellis would be great. So that's my bad for leaving him out. All right, Maxime Renaud. So again, over on the Substack, I have a video breakdown for Maxime Renaud and Ryan Cockbrenner, two names in this session. Joshua, you're not getting a Rocco Zikarsky breakdown, my guy. Listen, I'm interested in Rocco. I truly am. Like, I just don't even know that there's enough film there to do it. So Maxime Renaud is the skilled stretch big, if that is something you guys are interested in. Big out of Stanford, 4 years. I think he can really shoot it. But beyond that, as I show in the video breakdown, he can do more. Like, he can truly play on the perimeter, O2. And so, like, that's what I like, is he understands playing out there, relocating, setting flare screens, all of that. Like, you really want to maximize in a SAR at the 4 or something like that. He's a big man that can do that. I think Maxime is a really nice addition to a center group of Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. So how does that sound to you? I know you haven't got super into Maxime, but what does that sound like to you? I will say defensively, I don't know that he's definitely not going to be like a major plus, but I do think he has good position. He has good size. He uses his hands well. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the idea of like that type of stretch 5 is great, right? I think if you have a center that could really rebound and really shoot the 3, even if they have some defensive limitations, you could probably live with that in spurts. If you're just playing and drop and trusting that they could just be a factor around the rim. And like, and this dude's like 7'1" or 7'2", right? Like, he's really big. I'm curious. I'm curious how that would, like, translate just from a getting up and down the floor,
No, he
Stem.
moves. He doesn't move like Danny Wolf, but he moves okay. Like he moves okay.
Hey, for the 37th pick, like I think that's worth a shot. Like if there's one thing the Pistons could use, like it's probably stretch shooting at the 5. We didn't see Isaiah Stewart take as many last season, so that's an area where they could improve.
And to be clear, like I don't think Maxime is going to make it to 37. I think that they would have to trade up. But like I said this on a podcast recently that Maxime would be a guy. Oh, it's Pistons Talk. Go check that out. We had a really good conversation. We talked about Maxime, Adu Thiero, and Ryan Cockbrenner, and I said that I thought Maxime would be the guy I would be okay with Trajan trading up. And I used the Brooklyn spots at 26 and 27 or 27, 28, whatever it is. They have back-to-back picks at the end of the first round. I use that as the spot where I would be okay. All right, I'm going to throw these other names at you, and I'll give you the quick pitch, Omari, and you tell me the interesting name. I'm sure you've seen a little bit of some of these guys. Yeah. Ryan Cockbrenner is like the defensive drop coverage big with maybe floor spacing. Danny Wolf is the versatile, skilled, turns it over a bunch. What is he? What is he not? But I don't think there's any chance he's there, but we'll see. I've been wrong about guys falling in the draft before. That's for sure. Thanks, Cam Whitmore. Jan Berenjay is the raw, probably not ready for a couple years, but like rim running, rim protector. Janai Broom is the older kind of versatile forward / big. Can he shoot it? Can he not? And Hansen Yang is like massive, can't move very well, but man, he can really pass and is really fun with that. Any of those names stick out to you?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Cockbrenner a bit. Again, like another just massive dude who can do a little bit of everything. Not a lot of true holes in his game. Like the Pistons could use size.
Sure.
Like they could absolutely use size in their front court. So like the idea of him like just being like a legitimate huge 7-footer who's just going to eat up space, right? Like I think that there's a lot of like upside to having a guy like that. I have some familiarity with Johnny Broom. I like the idea of like a guy just with his overall tool set. Like, I think he has some versatility. Like that's what sounds good to me. I know Johnny Broom's a little bit smaller too. Like, I don't know if he's that much bigger than Isaiah Stewart or somewhere between him and Duran. But yeah, sign me up for the 7-foot guys. They're going to give you some size. They're going to give you some scoring. If you just need that as a third big, I think that's perfect.
Yeah. All right. So let's go to the kind of the wing forward room. And again, guys, some of these names are guys that would have to fall. I'm not going to go through my whole board here on where I have them. And obviously my board isn't reflective of NBA teams for sure, but the rookie scale gives you consensus boards. So that's always a good resource as well. So Rasheer Fleming speaks straight to my heart. Again, I think that would have to be a trade up. I don't think he's lasting in the second round, but just a super athletic, crazy wingspan, shot it really well from 3 this year, has some things to work on defensively and ball skills. Neek Clifford is another guy I don't think ends up getting to that spot, but like, is this all around wing? Will Riley, young kid out of Illinois that has an interesting offensive game. Noah Pinda is like this, like super strong advantage exploiter. A little bit of worried about the jumper. Hugo Gonzalez, I need to dive back into the film because he's finally playing now. Adu Thiero is super athletic, really fun defensively, can't shoot. Let me know if you've heard of that one before. Alex Tui, another versatile player out of the NBL. Any of those names kind of strike you a little bit?
Yeah. Rasheer Fleming is a name that's come up a lot.
Yeah.
And is he, like, he's probably not going to be there at 37, is he? Most of the people are talking about him.
So Wes said he used the Tankathon board and went 20 to 40. I think Rasheer would absolutely have to be a trade up guy. So as I go through the names I just mentioned, I think you would have to trade up for Fleming. I think Neek Clifford would have to fall based on where I have him, and you have to trade up. Will Riley would be a trade up. Pinda, maybe slight trade up.
Yeah, I like Pinda too. Like,
yeah, Pinda's real interesting, man. Like Noah Pinda is really, really interesting. Thiero, I don't know. I have Thiero in their range, but I could see people, again, if they think he can shoot it or they can figure out the shooting, or if shooting isn't as big of an issue with their rosters, I could see him being higher on boards. Tui, I think, definitely is in play at 37.
Yeah, like there's a lot of really interesting names in there. Like you have some guys like with some like really great athleticism. Like Thero's one of the better athletes in the draft.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like
No
super
question.
bouncy, like some good names in there. Like the thing is, when you're looking like at a pick that late, you're getting shooting, or you're getting athleticism, or you're getting like you're not getting everything. So I would say, like I would probably be more open to taking a wing that can't shoot in that range. If you're just going off of a pure upside play,
Sure.
like yeah, there's like drafting for need. You need a 7 foot center or whatever it may be, but like there's just a lot of toolsy rings in that range that I think if you're cool with it being a 2 or 3 year thing, could pay off down the road.
We're about to get to the guards, Keith. I promise I'll get there. But Far Gone says what hurts the situation is the players returning to college. Like, yeah, NIL has hurt the depth of the draft. I will say this. I have a tier break at 34 right now. That is my tier break of guys I think are potential first round picks. I don't think that the Pistons at 37 is an awful position. I think there's a chance that one of these interesting names ends up there. I've said about 40 is my cutoff for interesting names, and I'm sure some guys will go above it. Another name I'll throw out is Drake Powell, a guy that stayed in from North Carolina, a guy I think can really defend. We'll see where the shooting goes, but as Mr. Ray says, like, is this guy playing next year anyway? So, like, they're not part of the rotation next year. Give them a year to figure out the shot and work with Fred Vinson. So Wes says Pinda is an early. He's super fun for me. He said he's very early on his research as well. All right, so the guard. So you have Sion James, who is like this get after you point of attack defender who like has to be able to shoot. Ben Seraph, who I think is awesome. Like, I think that dude can really, really, like, somebody asked about the highest ceiling. Quick Darshan. Like, if Ben Seraph goes in the second round, he has the highest ceiling in the second round. Let's see. Walter Clayton Jr., I don't think he gets there. Cedric Coward, I don't think gets there. Cam Jones, Chaz Lanier, you had Drake Powell here. Keith Black Trudeau also brings up Tyrese Proctor. So those are some interesting names there. Familiar with any of those names that stand out to you, O2?
Yeah, Ben Seraph, I'm familiar with for sure. Just crazy passer. Like I watched some of his highlight clips that reminded me of when Ricky Rubio got drafted, and he was just doing all this Steve Nash stuff. And it's like, okay, cool. And like anytime you have a young guy who's playing at a high level for like a genuinely good European team, I think that turns heads. I don't know what else he brings beyond just what he could do with the ball in his hands. I know he's not a great shooter, which kind of makes him probably not a great fit with the Pistons. But if you're just going for pure upside, like we want a guy that we think has the best chance to be like a rotation player or better, in 4 years or whatever, then yeah, like that's probably pretty worthwhile. I'm also pretty familiar with Walter Clayton, just knowing that he's a really, really, really good shooter, but he's also a little bit small. So that's kind of another thing too. Like, can you have him and Marcus Sasser? Or can you have him and Dennis Schroeder or like whoever long term? Just given that you can only have so many smaller guys, but elite shooter, like again, like at that spot, if the goal is just to get somebody who has a legit NBA skill, then like he's got that for sure.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where his draft stock ends up. Darion Williams did return to school. So Tyrese Proctor is an interesting one. That was a name that Keith asked about specifically with this. And I think he's an off the ball player a little bit more. I think that's the better role for him. I thought when he tried to play point guard, I didn't think that went as well. And so the other thing is but I think the jumper is there, and I think he defends at the point of attack. So Tyrese Proctor is an interesting name. I have him at 40 on my board. Cam Jones is another interesting one. He did play a little bit more on the ball. I saw somebody bring up Kobe Brea. Kobe Brea is a big time shooter. I don't know what else he does, but he is a big time shooter. He can absolutely do that. I just did my Chaz Lanier. Yeah, I just did the Chaz Lanier clips today. It was a little better defensively than what I thought in terms of like off ball rotations. And you guys know I'm a sucker for weak side defensive rotation, box out stuff. Lanier may have moved up my board, diving into that a little bit more today. He was already mid second round, but he may have went up a little bit. Yeah, Condon went back to Florida, obviously as a big guy. So yeah, maybe moving forward, Omari, you can pick out a couple guys you really want to watch and are interested in, and then we can dive into their games a little bit more. I feel like today we just kind of threw out a bunch of names, gave the surface level stuff, but maybe every week we can pick out one or two names and then just do a segment of let's talk really in depth about, Janai Broom and Adu Thiero. Or I'll give you another big man name is Niederhauser out of Penn State. Came on late in terms of the draft cycle, ridiculous combine measurements, upside there in terms of like just this big, that rim running, rim protection, some of that stuff. So that's another name that Pistons fans might want to get familiar with if they aren't already.
Yeah, and I also reported Chaz Lanier had a workout with the team recently. I get like another wing, with solid wing size that can really shoot the ball. So they've got some options in that range. I don't know if you look at that spot, like this would dictate what we do in free agency, but you could look at getting another 6'6" in that range shooter. Like there's some 7-footers there. I think there's a handful of opportunities in that range to find somebody who can contribute.
Well, and I think what I look at it as is if you're going to let Paul Reed go, I thought Paul Reed played meaningful minutes at times, like a meaningful role, right? As the third center. I do think that there's some names there potentially that could fill that role where you bring in that guy as a second round pick and then, you replace that role. Or like, I don't think Chaz Lanier is going to come in and start like Tim Hardaway Jr. did, but if Tim Hardaway Jr. walks and you want to get that archetype and that ilk into the system in the organization, a Chaz Lanier or a Kobe Brea or somebody like that could make sense. It's probably not next year, but in there. And like Stephen P says, thoughts on if you think Bobby gets minutes next year? I'm fascinated. I feel like there's a spot available, right? I mean, if you told me he went in and stole Fontecchio's role on the team, I wouldn't be shocked. I think it just comes down to Bobby's growth and improvement. And I think we talked about it in the last couple episodes. Like that probably is what Summer League is going to be about is watching Bobby Klintman for the Detroit Pistons this year. There's no top 5 pick to get excited about it in Vegas. Hopefully they play the first couple days I'm there. I think surely everybody plays in the first 2 or 3 days, right?
Yeah,
so
I think everybody plays in the first.
Yes. So at least I'll at least get to see them play once. I doubt they get the Thursday night prime time though. My guess is that will be a, Dallas Mavericks, San Antonio Spurs game on Thursday night to see Cooper Flagg versus Dylan Harper.
I think that one is already booked. Assuming Dylan Harper goes number 2, but I can't imagine why he wouldn't. That's another fun debate. Like, what should the Spurs like? We don't have to talk about this now. But they have so many bigs. So this would be a fun summer league to watch from afar. Like none of these guys have any stakes on the Pistons. It'd be nice to just go to Vegas and just watch these guys compete. And and Bobby Klintman. We'll see if Ron Holland plays for the Pistons, but
Dennis Jenkins. Sure. Dennis Jenkins. I like watching Jenkins play. Beastly Arrow says thoughts on Drake Powell. I think Drake Powell's really interesting. I think he's really good defensively. I think the offensive game has to come around for him to really be successful. If he's there at 37 as a young player that you're just going to take time to develop, I think that's a really, really interesting name for the Pistons on the wing. So I like that name for them. Yeah, I don't know what happens with Lindy Waters, unrestricted free agent, right? So we'll see if he gets brought back or not, Omari. That's all I got. Well, real quick to talk about, I think the Mavs should absolutely select Cooper Flagg at number 1, no questions asked. And honestly, I think the Spurs should absolutely select Dylan Harper unless they get like a king's ransom in a trade. I have tier breaks with those two guys. I think Cooper is in a tier in his own, and I have Dylan Harper in a tier of his own at number 2 before a tier of 6 or 7 players after him. So I do think that will be 1-2 on draft night. So that's all I got. I know we'll have some guests on over the next few weeks. I think Wes, we have like 3 weeks, and then we get, honestly, the draft is this month, not that far away. We'll at least have a second round pick to talk about. So yeah, we'll get into that. We'll have some more offseason talk. We'll get some guests on and we'll go from there. But that is it for tonight. So O2, take it away, my friend.
For sure. And with that, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes Davenport, as always. And we'll talk to you all next week.